A long time ago, I showed you how to make these modern garden planters, and it's such a great project. I'm going to revisit it because they're easy to make, they're durable, and when your friends say, "Where did you buy them from?" you can say, "I made them." 4 years ago, in the very infancy of the Proper DIY channel, I showed you how to make these modern wooden garden planters. Now, 4 years later on, would you believe, I'm sprucing them up again to get them out for this summer period in the front of my house. And I realise a lot of people watching the channel now didn't watch then and probably haven't gone back to the old videos. And this project is such a good project that any DIYer or junior woodworker can do. And you end up with something really quite smart without a lot of effort or cost. This is a great little project because it's easy to build, it's useful, it looks good, and you end up with something that's durable and will last forever. And any wooden planter that looks like this in the shops tends to be thin, lightweight, and I guarantee you these days they're not going to be particularly cheap either. So let's get on to the build of our ones. And this is just made purely from 3x2 CLS timber. And when I say 3x2, I mean 38mm by 63, and CLS just means Canadian Lumber Standard. That means it's a certain strength, it's going to be uniform dimension, and it's going to be straight-ish, but you can pick out the straight ones when you pick them up from the DIY shop. I'm using plain timber, not treated timber for this, and to be honest with you, after looking at them after 4 years, you don't need to use treated timber, but if you want to, you can. It's just going to be a little bit more expensive. And to make one of these planters, I've designed it to use all the timber as efficiently as possible with almost no offcuts. And a planter like this will take 6 lengths of 8 foot or 2.4 metre long pieces of CLS. And each length at the moment is costing around about £4, which means for the timber for this, it's going to cost you about £24 and then another couple of pounds for the paint and a little bit of plastic, which we'll look at a little bit later. Right, let's get on to the build. Let's go back to vintage Proper DIY and I'll show you how to start cutting these and putting it together. I start by cutting the top pieces that are going to be on the flat with 45-degree mitered ends. You're obviously going to need 4 of these, and I cut them to 485mm along the long edge, which means that they just sit on top of the planter quite nicely. Now, the one tool that will make this project an awful lot easier is to have a miter saw. Any sort of miter saw or chop saw will help cut this wood, and maybe if you haven't got one, this could be the project that you invest in one. Alternatively, you could potentially use a circular saw. And for the rest of the planter, you're going to need 24 395mm lengths. That means you can get 6 out of a 2.4 metre long piece 3x2 CLS with almost no wastage. If you want to see this old video in full, I'll put a link in the description below. So you'll see that I'm actually assembling this upside down. So I start with the top pieces where I glue the joints and countersink a screw into each one, which I'll just hide with a little bit of filler. And then I start building the sides of the planter with the 3x2 on its edge. Here I'm using 80mm long screws for this in a drilled hole slightly bigger than the screw, so it pulls both pieces tight together, and I make sure that I drive them in flush with the surface. The glue I'm using on this is internal and external glue, which I think is a good idea because obviously they're going to be outside in the rain. But it doesn't have to be anything special, just make sure there's enough of it and the screws pull the whole thing together, so that glue makes a really good bond on the timber surface. You also need to stagger these screws, so on the next level up you don't hit the level that you've just put in. I learnt that from experience. And the screws on this are really just to hold it together while the glue is drying. Once the glue's dried, in theory, you could take out all the screws and it would still be one sort of big monolithic lump of timber. Obviously, you can't get to the screws, And you don't need to use stainless steel. They're so well embedded in this that they're not going to rust, and even if they do, you can't see them. So any old screw will do, just the cheap ones from the DIY shop. And then you just continue with one row after the other until you get to the depth you want, staggering the joints so it's got like a brick bond type pattern to it. But I found that 6 rows of this timber just makes it look sort of square and is pleasing to the eye. So with the planter built, let's talk a little bit about protection. That's both from the damp soil on the inside of the planter that the plants are in, attacking the wood, and also the wind and the rain on the outside because it's obviously sitting outside. So on these ones, I used a paint called Garden Shades from Cuprinol that goes on really easily, and after the second coat actually looks stunning. And I must admit, over its time, it's worked out very well, and I would highly recommend it. I used it on all these planters and on here, which is my fake garage door, which I built over 4 years ago now. Now, when I did put this in, I think it was 2 coats of Garden Shades on here, and I've not touched it since. And I think for 4 years without a coat of paint, that is doing pretty well. It's obviously a little bit dusty and there's cobwebs and that I should really brush off. But when it comes to the paint, although you can see the knots through the paint, they're just a slightly different shade. It's really doing what I think doing quite well. But the one advantage this has got compared to other things around the garden is this doesn't actually get the sun hitting it. So it's facing north, so the sun's never on it. But even so, to be fair, after 4 years, it's doing pretty well. Any holes on the top ring can be filled with a wood filler, and then I give everything 2 coats of the Garden Shades. This one is called Urban Slate, which just matches my house, but they've got a number of different colours. And ironically, at the time of filming, the cheapest place I could find this paint is actually through Amazon, delivered to your door. So I'll also put an Amazon link in the description for the paint. To protect against the damp internal soil, I've been using DPM plastic. All that is damp-proof membrane. You can use any type of plastic, but I would suggest it's black. And what I'm doing here is just pinning a batten at the top with the plastic upside down, and then I can fold the plastic over that batten so it ends up hidden, so you can't actually see any fixings at all, which is quite a nice detail, and over the last 4 years has held up quite nicely and worked out quite well. Damp-proof membrane isn't that expensive. I'll put a link to a small amount that you can buy just on Amazon that will probably give you enough to build about 4 or 5 of these, and at the time of filming I think is about £11. With the plastic all the way through, then you can just pin it at the bottom and then trim off any excess. With the plastic in place, I can now put 2 feet on it, made up of another 2 pieces of the 3x2 CLS. And on top of these, I screw on a couple of treated boards and cover with weed control fabric to stop the soil from falling through. The alternative, because these are going to get very wet when you water the plants in this planter, is to use any old wood or MDF as a sacrificial piece, knowing that you're going to have to replace it after a couple of years. Just finish the whole thing off with 4 plastic feet, just to elevate it off the ground and get it away from any standing water. So after 4 years of being out in the weather every day of the year, these have never been inside, not in a greenhouse or shed or anything. These have just been outside since the day I built them. How have they fared? Well, not too bad actually. So obviously the sun has got to some of the paint and some of the joints just opened up slightly, which you'd expect, especially on these mitre joints, which are difficult to glue together. But apart from that, there's no rot at all, and those little plastic feet at the bottom just elevate it a few millimetres off the ground. So even when the patio is wet, this has been able to dry out, which is a key thing to stopping any rot. However, we haven't actually painted this yet, so I'm going to give it another coat of Garden Shades, then I'll show you what it looks like once I've finished. Before I started painting these, I gave them a bit of a brush down to get the worst of the cobwebs and all of that sort of stuff off. And here I'm using the lowest grade paintbrush I have. My top grade is a new good quality one, and the lowest grade is a well-used cheap disposable one, which this is. And just another little tip, rather than spending 5 minutes painting your planter on your patio and then realising that you have small paint spots all over your Indian sandstone and then have to spend the next 10 minutes washing it down, put your planter on the grass where it doesn't really matter where the paint splashes go. And after not very long, my two planters are all painted and looking ready for the summer season. So there you go, that is in place for the summer season. These are green and red cannas, I don't know the Latin name. I planted them last year, just cut them back. They've just started coming up and they'll go to about head height, so that'd be quite a nice display for 2025. I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned a little bit about one of my favourite projects ever. I will see you next time.